Good morning, VC vinyl community. It's Mazzy here. I'm going to do an episode on live albums, live shows that I attended that were turned into albums. Now, a lot of these I was actually at the recording, the actual recording date. However, there's a handful of these which were recorded over maybe an entire tour. They took a track from this venue, another venue. So I can't guarantee I was at every specific show, but I was definitely on that tour, and the set lists in many cases are identical. Sometimes they strayed off, and so I'm going to share them. I was in that perfect space, the perfect place, and the perfect time to being in San Francisco in the 70s. Well, I grew up in San Francisco before that, but you know, coming of age, late 60s, 70s, teenager, 20s, worked in record stores, so I got into a lot of great shows for free through record labels, and obviously I went to Winterland all the time, and I paid for it, and tickets were, you know, $3, $4, $5. The Stones at Winterland in '72 was $5.50 with Stevie Wonder opening, so big difference. Anyway, I'm gonna go through these, and probably the most famous show I went to that people know about because there was a film made of it was the 1976 Last Waltz with the band. Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, Neil Diamond, Paul Butterfield, Joni Mitchell, Van Morrison. Great, great show. I won't get into detail because you know it. And if you haven't seen the film, the Martin Scorsese film, you got to see it. Tickets were $25, which was a shitload of money then. I had a bunch of friends that didn't want to pay that. They thought it'd be a bust. Of course, years later, they wish they had gone, because most tickets at the time, you know, were $4, $5, $6 to a show, $25 to go to Winterland. But hey, you got turkey, and you got poetry from the Beat Poets, Michael McClure, things like that. These aren't in any order, but I just want to let you know. In '83, I was in New York going to the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and I saw Laurie Anderson perform this. She's a performance artist, musician, violinist, used a lot of vocoder and tape loops at the time. She was one of the first ones working on that. Her probably most famous piece is Oh Superman. Ah, 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 ah. Oh Superman. I love her. I love her voice. I've seen her 4 or 5 times. Years later, I think the last 10, 15 years of his life, she was married to Lou Reed until he passed. Anyway, great performance artist. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Next, I saw them on the West Coast. This was actually, I think, recorded in Los Angeles at the Wiltern, maybe? Not quite sure, but I saw the Byrds in the Bay Area, this version of the Byrds, with kind of the later version, Chestnut Mare period, with Skip Batten and Gene Parsons and Gene White. Gene White? I'm blanking out right now. But, you know, great, great guitar player. This is a great album. One record is live, one is studio. But I saw this period when they were doing, you know, 18-minute versions of what's the song? Come on, Maslow. You're baking it here. Anyway, 8 Miles High. There we go. Sorry. Okay, Bob Dylan. I've seen Bob Dylan so many times. But the first time was 1974 tour with the band Wake of the Flood. I saw 2 of the shows, and I can't guarantee those exact tracks are on this recording, but that was sort of his big comeback, and it was a huge, huge tour. Bill Graham produced it. Great album. Then I saw him over the years a lot in the 70s. I saw on the Hard Rain tour. This is a promo copy I got when I worked in the record business. A world difference 2 years later. Pretty amazing, all the differences. There's also an album called Live at Budokan. I didn't see the Budokan tour, but I saw him on that tour in Rotterdam. I was in Europe after college, and just outside of Amsterdam, I saw him in Rotterdam. I think with Eric Clapton was on the set too, but not playing with him. And I saw that same tour in at the Oakland Coliseum. A lot of people don't like that because they called it Dylan's Vegas tour because they had all these background singers and horn players. I thought it was great. So listen to the Live at Budokan record. Another one, as you've probably seen in earlier videos, my favorite guitarist of all time is Ry Cooder. And actually I was at both these shows. 1976, I believe, the Great American Music Hall in San Francisco. Yep. And actually he did 4 shows, and I went to all 4 of them. I think he did 2 a night. And then what is it, maybe not even 10 years ago, also at the Great American Music Hall. And great album. Great artist. I'll go see him anytime I can. I just saw him again recently in Seattle and San Francisco. Okay, going back to 2005, I got my American Express points, my Virgin Atlantic miles, and I went to London to the Royal Albert Hall to see Cream. I never saw Cream back in the day, and my buddy and I ended up going to London for a week, and we saw the second show of this tour. They were a little, obviously you probably heard this, or if not, you've seen the video. Eric's playing a Strat instead of the SG, the Gibson, and they were great, but everything is maybe a quarter slower tempo. You know, oh man. Anyway, it was great to be able to see Cream, and going to the Royal Albert Hall, if you haven't done that, it's fabulous. I know Clapton does his annual show there. I don't know if he's going to continue to do it, but he does shows there. So I've been there twice, and this was the second time. I love the Royal Albert Hall. A kumbaya moment, but there's another one coming up. In fact, I'll do it next. That was even more emotional and beautiful and just the perfect night. And that is, since I am a Beatle freak, I went in, was it 2003, I believe? I went to Royal Albert Hall to the concert of George. And if you haven't seen the film, you should see the film, because it was amazing. Ravi Shankar wrote an opening piece that his daughter Anushka performed. And of course there was Clapton and Petty and Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney and Procol Harum guy, you know, on vocals, and Billy Preston, and I'm blanking out there, see? But, because I don't keep notes. I should know this off the top of my head. But it was an amazing show, amazing emotional performance. What a wonderful night. I got 9th row tickets to that show, and I went to that. And last year I indulged myself because I collect everything Beatles, and I got this special limited edition that has the Blu-ray, has the album, has CD, has a booklet. I won't get into it. It's kind of like those Genesis limited books. And then, see, it's like the White Album, right? I gotta be careful here. Gorgeous collection. I'm not going to go through it, but one of those indulgements that I went for, because anything Beatles is in my collection. Actually, there's also a piece of the fabric they used on the backdrop in the movie for the concert of George. It probably smells like incense too, or that's a Ravi Shankar book. Something in here does. Now, I was at this show, but it wasn't at the Royal Albert Hall. This was the first edition where they put this live Creedence Clearwater album out in the 80s, 1980, and it turned out the tapes were from the Oakland Coliseum show. So the later pressings say Creedence Clearwater at the Oakland Coliseum, not the Royal Albert Hall. And I was at the Oakland Coliseum show. I first saw Creedence in 1968, right when their first album came out. There was a festival, San Francisco International Pop Festival in Alameda, which is right across the bay from San Francisco. And that's where I first saw Creedence when they were starting out. Great, right? Okay, I'm just going to show one sample of Grateful Dead. I saw the Grateful Dead so many times, and with all their live albums, you could go crazy. I could probably pull the exact thing. I'm not much of a Deadhead anymore in terms of I'm not a completist, but I've seen so many shows. Saw them in Golden Gate Park in around 68 or 69. I saw them in 71, 72, Winterland, those shows. So around the Europe 72 period, I saw that group. I saw them a lot up until maybe 76, 77, where I kind of pulled back because I was getting more into minimal punk, new wave kind of stuff, and that whole Dead thing sort of boring me a little bit. Although I got into them a little again in the late, I guess in the 80s, right? Can't think right now, probably 89 for a couple of shows. But this was a show, acoustic-based show, at on the Great Highway of San Francisco, which is right below the Cliff House across from the Pacific Ocean. And this was kind of acoustic show. I think I heard about it at the last minute. It was at the Family Dog, and the Family Dog was the company that was producing shows years earlier at the Avalon Ballroom. But this was, I think, a Record Store Day release a few years ago. Amazing cover, huh? I collect mini posters too. I have some of the San Francisco handbills. Another show I was at, saw Jefferson Airplane I think 3 times. This was the later Airplane, probably with Papa John Creech, or as some of us refer to him as Papa John Screech. To me, that violin gets a little screechy in some of their stuff. So this is not the best time of the Airplane. Bless His Pointed Little Head is one of the great live albums. That's the better album. I think that was at the Fillmore East. I was not at that show. I think I saw him once around that period. But I was at this show at Winterland, so I pulled it out. Another one, I was on the tour, but not at the exact show, Little Feat, Waiting for Columbus, one of the great live albums. Somewhere I may be in here, but I saw them so many times around that period, or actually not so many, probably 3 times. And during the times this was recorded, I saw them once, and again in San Francisco. I was not at this Madison Square Garden show. However, I saw the Stones twice in 1969. Once was at the Oakland Coliseum earlier in the year. And then the second time, I snuck out with some friends I was going to high school with, and we went to Altamont. And I was at Altamont when the Stones, Flying Burrito Brothers, Jefferson Airplane, Grateful Dead, was Santana, I think? I'm blanking out right now. Crazy experience. I didn't know someone was murdered until I got home the next day because I was way back, and it was a mess. But it's one of those things, you know, you look back on and remember what a crazy thing just getting there. I don't even remember the Stones or anyone being great. It was not a great musical experience. The movie and the soundtrack is better, or the live recordings from that period. So Rolling Stones, saw them maybe 5 times. And then lastly here, almost lastly, I'm going to show you Rust Never Sleeps, Neil Young. I was at 2 of the shows where they recorded at the boarding house in San Francisco. Very small venue, great place to see music. We get a lot of tickets from the record companies, and they do a lot of showcases there. So I've seen countless shows at the boarding house. Tore down, Pay Paradise, put a parking lot, and actually put a high-rise. It was a really kind of soulful, great place. Saw the very first Talking Heads tour, Talking Heads there, amongst other people, Emmylou Harris, and on and on and on. Anyway, I was at this show, and obviously a lot of this album is overdubbed in the studio after the fact, but still it has that great Neil Young, grungy, Crazy Horse thing. So that's it. Lastly, I'm just going to do a story, just because. The One That Got Away. Picture, if you will, a young boy, 12 years old, days after his 12th birthday. It's a Monday night, 5:30, 6 o'clock. One of his best friends, Danny, rings the doorbell and says, "My dad gave us these tickets for a show tonight. If your mother can drive, we can go, and they're free." I went to my mother, and I said, "Can I go with Danny to the show? Can you drive us?" She said, "No, Norman. You have a drum lesson tonight. Your drum lesson's at 7 p.m. Since we didn't cancel 24 hours in advance, we have to pay. So you're going to your drum lesson. You can go next year to see this band." This was San Francisco. It was Monday night, August 29th, 1966. The Beatles at Candlestick Park. It turned out to be the last concert the Beatles ever performed to a paid audience. My mother said I could go next year. I never saw the Beatles. I no longer play the drums. And my mother, rest her peace, is no longer with us. This is not from that year, but the Hollywood Bowl. I just pulled this just because I had to put a Beatle record. This was 64, 65. But I never saw the Beatles. Thanks, Mom. Next year. Mazzy out.